Hello, welcome to this episode of CloudBites Conversations, where we're really lucky to have Rob Cowell join us. Rob is an author, he's a DevOps advocate at Gearset. He's someone that I've known for probably coming up to nearly 10 years now, I reckon, probably, Rob. And he's one of these people that's always around the ecosystem, always around the Ohana, talking, sharing, and giving his thoughts, and just sharing his knowledge with people. So I'm really excited to have Rob today. So welcome to the podcast, Rob.
Thanks, Paul. Glad to be here. And I think it is about 10 years, which is quite scary. I've been around a little while.
So someone said to me on a phone call yesterday with a client, they're like, "Oh, and Paul's been working with Salesforce, so it's about 15 years, isn't it, Paul?" I was like, "Yep," and it kind of suddenly starts adding up. So one of the reasons I wanted to have Rob on the podcast is, there's many reasons because Rob's done a lot of things, as we will cover. But one of the reasons is that Rob has one of the more interesting techie backgrounds, I think, for people that come on there, and is also one of these people that plays around with some interesting little bits of tech nowadays. So, Rob, why don't you just give us a bit of an intro as to how you got started in the Salesforce space, and I know a bit of your background as to who you are, where you come from, as Scylla would have said. It's a very British joke.
That's a reference more for your UK.
Viewers, sorry. Sorry for international listeners there.
Okay, so similar kind of time span to yourself. I think I'm at sort of 14 and a half years in the Salesforce ecosystem now. So you've stolen a march on me a little bit there. But yeah, similar kind of time frame. So I started, and I can remember the exact date. It's March 26th, 2010, was when I got my first role with anything to do with Salesforce. And it was quite a strange story. So I was doing contracting, doing hybrid support development roles. And the idea of that is, you're the last line of defense. It's gone through help desk and so on. No one can fix it. You've got to get into the code and fix it. So it's kind of support development, as it was known back then. But on my first day of this new contract, the hiring manager said to me, "So if anybody asks, you're the Salesforce expert, because the only way they'd sign off more budget for another person is if we told them we were getting a Salesforce expert." I just said, "Okay, yeah, that's fine. What is Salesforce?" And the rest, as they say, is history. But obviously, before that, I did have a tech background. I'd been a Microsoft Stack developer for quite a while. Most of that in .NET, but before that, the lineage of .NET. So things like VB6, Microsoft Access. I was an Access developer since version 2. So I'd kind of come up through coding languages which were edging slowly towards that object-oriented programming that Apex follows. So when I first kind of discovered Apex, it wasn't a huge leap. The huge leap was learning to not use Apex for everything, which is the clicks not code philosophy of Salesforce. So that was probably the biggest learning curve as I kind of started working with Salesforce. But like I said, it's been 14 years. I think I've got the hang of it now.
Yeah, it's so I was excuse me. I was the same, a .NET guy before I moved to Salesforce, and I'd also done Access, because I feel that there's a bunch of programmers that if you worked in an IT department or enterprise for a period, you did Access.
Yeah,
and it was just because it had an amazing database. It was a really powerful little database engine running in the background, and you could distribute it widely. But that point you make there about not having to do Apex for everything, I remember and I'm sure it was the same for you, the moment that the penny dropped for me as to why Salesforce and why I do it was I was showing, it was actually after I'd been doing Salesforce about 2 or 3 months. And I went back to talk to some of my former .NET friends and former .NET colleagues, and they were just like, "Well, you know what we're building. We're investigating this cloud computing thing," which was still somewhat new at the time. And they said, "Yeah, how could we do that in Salesforce?" And it was the fact that in 10 minutes I could get an object and a basic page structure and things built out. And it was when one of them said to us, well, how have you done user authentication? How have you built the login screen? And I was like, oh, you don't need to do that.
Yeah.
And that was the moment the penny dropped, because ever since, anytime I've had to write a login screen, still doing a bit of Node stuff or Ruby stuff, whatever, it pains me. It pains me so much. It's the philosophy is very different.
Yeah, and that was kind of a similar light bulb moment for me, like with other stacks like Microsoft, and I did a bit of Java and PHP and things as well. With Salesforce, you don't have to worry about the database access layer. You don't have to, well, you do have to build the tables, but it's not quite as painful as that traditional kind of SQL database model. You don't have to, build queries as much. A lot of that kind of plumbing and engineering within the platform, the fundamentals are done for you. So you can really focus on developing what the business is actually asking for, not like the foundations of how to even get to that point. And that changes everything, right? You're not having to write like a custom database object relation mapping entity management. It's like, all that stuff that we've slogged through over the years. It's largely done for us. So you're focusing on the business need, not the engineering need quite as much. And that was a game changer. It's like, hold on, I don't have to work so hard, and I get paid the same, if not more, for the same output.
And I think you get to work on more interesting things as well. Like, once you've written a front end for a user entry screen once, you've done it 1,000. It's not exciting, not really doing anything valuable. It's that thing around not needing the ORM and pieces like that. That's one of my big bugbears at the moment is, and I'm sure you've seen kind of a lot of the debate on LinkedIn and Twitter and places where people are talking about, the use of software engineering patterns and things like that in Salesforce. And I'm all for good software engineering, but I'm more important to me is doing the right thing for the platform at the time. And Salesforce isn't C#, Salesforce isn't Java, and a lot of the stuff that was written for C# and Java or PHP or whatever you want it to be doesn't apply, doesn't work. And so I have a blog post that I've partly written, which I need to finish, which is where my view is that the only thing that matters is how fast your execution gets done for your user. Everything else is kind of, and there's maintainability and things like that.
I look forward to seeing that and debating it with you, but
it's
in a constructive way, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose my kind of 10-second treatise is that I think there's too many developers that focus on building out layers and layers of Apex to kind of make it easy for them to manage. And we might come on to this in a minute where you've done consulting as well, is that a large portion of organizations have consultants in, do a contract or a project, and never look at that code again. And so you spending time doing that, yes, it makes it easier if someone comes and updates it. But I've got into orgs where there is code from 2000 and I think 2009 is the earliest I've seen. Like that's not gonna really care whether it's running, it's fine. And if you can save 2 seconds in the transaction for the end user over those 10 years, that's going to be a far bigger kind of benefit to them than otherwise. There is more detail to it, but yeah, it's personal.
We can definitely dig into that as the conversation goes. I have, as folks will see from my T-shirt, I have a background in old technology where every clock cycle on the CPU mattered. So there was that kind of need for speed, but a lot of corners were cut, and I think there's potential for for those same corners to be cut. But we can certainly dig into that in a little while.
Well, let's dive into a little bit of your, with your, for those that are watching rather than listening, you will see that Rob has a lovely Sinclair ZX Spectrum T-shirt on. And one of the things that kind of I know you do, you've talked about a lot on Twitter, especially with other kind of people in the ecosystem as well, like Lacey and others, is old hardware. It's the computers that were there when we were kids and getting started. So you play a lot with a lot of them still, don't you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And play is an interesting term because, I have a very geeky definition of play. I know there's a big community for like retro computers and retro consoles where, they want to play the old games. But for me, the interest has always lied in programming them. So, I do have an affinity for, the computers rather than the consoles. If it's got a keyboard, I can get into it. That's changed over the years. I have various adapters and things. But the idea is that, I want to sort of explore those old machines and kind of, write code to them like I used to do back in the day, and learn new tricks and techniques in that way as well. So I have an extensive collection. Some of those computers will be familiar to a global audience, things like the Commodore 64 and the Ataris. The Sinclair Spectrum was a bit more of a UK hit than a global hit, but it was, the home computer of the day in the 80s. But yeah, some of these I've collected after the fact. I didn't have them back in the day, and I'm rediscovering them in modern times. But yeah, most of them, if not all of them, I've written code for. I tend to do things that are a little bit fun, not necessarily games, but just like animations, music, and artwork and stuff, and combine the two. There's a whole subculture called the demo scene. It's popular enough that it's made it to Wikipedia now, so it can't be too niche. But the idea is, you're writing like real-time animations and music and productions. There's nothing that's pre-recorded. You're writing code that generates effects and animations on the fly. Which is quite a discipline. And that's kind of the link, I guess, between what we were talking about of, getting operations and code to run as quickly as possible. Because, these old machines, they don't have a lot of power. In the day and age now where we have multi-gigahertz PCs, we're talking like, the Commodore 64 had less than 1 megahertz. The Spectrum's about 1 megahertz. These are slow old machines, but they were the machines of the day. So you do optimize your code to try and run as fast as possible. And there's lots of dirty hacks that will get you that. Now, if you kind of fast forward that to the Salesforce world or any other platform of the day today, quick and dirty hacks will come back and bite you pretty quickly. So yes, you have that need for speed and you want that transaction to complete successfully, but you also want it to be pretty error-free. You want it to be maintainable. You want it to be scalable. All these kind of architectural practices that have been drummed into us. So it is a balancing act, right? You want to make sure that it is performant. You do want that speed, but you also want to make sure you've factored in those other considerations. With the old computers, all bets are off. I don't care whether it scales. It's only ever going to run on one machine at a time for about 5 minutes. It's just all out for speed.
Yeah, no, I to sort of clarify what I was saying. I definitely agree that we want to make sure that it scales, it works, it's it's error handling, and all of these things, and maintainable in the right way. I think my summarization of what I think is at the moment a 3,000 word post, which needs trimming down into 10 seconds of wording, is it's the layers of things that people add in because they're patterns rather than things like that. And I think you kind of make an interesting point about this is something I made to when I used to do training for Salesforce is when I was training, you'd effectively get 2 types of people come in, or maybe 3 types of people come in for your Salesforce training sessions. The first group, and for listeners and viewers, when I say Salesforce training sessions here, I mean the official Salesforce kind of courses. So used to do some of those, mostly on the tech side. And for the Apex ones, you would get in either someone who was a new graduate, and put on a grad scheme and told you got to learn Salesforce and sent by their company to get skilled up. You'd have someone who was fairly experienced with Salesforce but wanted to get a certification and struggled with it before. Or you'd have someone moving from another language like .NET, typically .NET or Java. It was always interesting if you got a room where there was half .NET and half Java because you'd see them sort of like stare each other down a little bit. But and what I always found really interesting is that for those that came from the Salesforce background and were just trying to skill up, they had a much better inbuilt understanding of limits than those that, especially kind of the graduates, because the C# and Java developers are like, well, if it runs slow, you buy a bigger server, and like, effectively you just scale your clouds and that's it. For new graduates, often they'd done like a quick course, or very few of them were actually computer science graduates.
Right.
And so they'd done something like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript course, or something like that on Pluralsight or something. And which they understood coding at a fundamental level, but again, it was like, well, I've built my website and I've built my web server, and I just build a bigger server. Or isn't this what AWS does, where you just scale it up as you need to? And I think that one of the really interesting things with Salesforce, I think, is really a parallel to some of these old machines and kind of the program that you used to have to think about doing is that limitation of the transaction. Is that if you want to, and this is one of the things that I love most about Salesforce, is it doesn't matter if you are me at Groundwork Apps, that is a small startup organization, or if you are Coca-Cola or Nestle or any of the big organizations that are using it, F1 that we see using it in all of these, is that I get exactly the same amount of transaction resources as you do. And you cannot, you can pay for almost anything on Salesforce except a bigger transaction. And that's where I think there's this really interesting parallel about doing that sort of the way in which you write and the way in which you plan.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the other kind of sort of sub-disciplines within that sort of demo scene that I talked about earlier is that people realize that, modern PCs, largely unlimited, from a creative constraint of development, you don't really have any limits. You just throw more hardware at it. So within that, we've kind of started, or started a little while back, of some new disciplines. So there are competitions where everything, your entire executable is not allowed to be bigger than 4 kilobytes. So you've got to fit your code, your music, and your artwork, which, but because of those constraints, is procedurally generated. But everything has to fit in 4 kilobytes. It's an artificial constraint, but it means that you develop that skill set of being hyper efficient, of being, like reusing algorithms, generating data programmatically, and then perhaps, you might want to use that data to generate visual patterns and audio patterns, and it's an interesting discipline, but it means, it's that akin to Salesforce's limits, taken to an extreme. But enforcing those limits forces you to think more in terms of efficiency, whether that's for size, for speed, performance, whatever metric you want to do there. So there's definitely elements of that. And it's a fun exercise. I've done one, but it's so hard to fit everything in 4 kilobytes. I've sent emails bigger than that, right?
I think most Word docs are bigger than 4 kilobytes.
Most empty Word docs are bigger than 4.
Most Word docs are probably empty. It's probably part of that as well, the amount from what I've seen. So what are you playing around with at the moment then? In your kind of, I'm going to say in your garage. It's probably not actually a physical garage. It's probably in the office around you behind the green screen.
It is, yes. I'm hiding it just because it's utter techno chaos in here. I have bits of computers and things all over the place. I've just been kind of super busy of late and haven't really sort of delved back into it. I also sort of write music and stuff on the computer. So I'm compiling what's historically known as a music disc, although it won't physically be on a disc. It's just basically a compilation of some of my tracks with a program around it, like play, fast forward, rewind, shuffle, and whatnot, and then some nice visualizations on that. And I'm doing that as a web-based thing using JavaScript and WebGL. So that as the music's playing, you've got some nice sort of animations and things. So I've been kind of tinkering with that for a while. There's a game that I used to love on one of my old Ataris. I'm porting that across to the Gamecube because why not? So
wow.
Just little projects that have sat around in my to-do list for a while, and I think as I get time to work on things, I'll pick them back up again.
So this leads me to 2 questions. First of all, is for your web-based kind of music playing tool and visualizer, please tell me you're calling it WebAmp after Winamp, because If you're not, you can have that name for free. Because I don't know if you were one of these people that was a Winamp fan like myself.
Oh, yeah.
But
back in the day, llamas and all that. Yeah.
Oh, it's absolutely, it was. such a brilliant little tool that just disappeared overnight. It's crazy.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
yeah,
I'm planning to open source the player when I've finished it, so people can like add in their own tunes and add in their own custom visualizations and things. So
there you go. So yeah, web amp coming soon. But the second question then is around the GameCube. So I had a GameCube as a teenager. It was the first large purchase I ever made for myself. So it was I had got my first job when I was 13, 14, probably 13. And, in my myriad of jobs, I used to work as a groundskeeper or a groundsman
okay,
during the summer holidays. Yeah, this is Paul's random jobs story here. And it was brilliant. Like, as a teenage boy, there's nothing better than basically being told you're going to cut grass, chop down trees, paint white lines, all sorts of things like that. And the guy I worked with was a real tinkerer as well. So I got to take apart like tractors and put them back together again. It was, as a techie, it was one of those things that was a brilliant little job. But the first payday I got, I went and sort of splashed it all because it was more money than I'd ever seen on a GameCube, and it's such a brilliant little. It was such a shame that console didn't take off in the way it could have and should have, because it was such a brilliant console. But what's the process of porting a game to the GameCube then? How do you develop a GameCube game? Like, this is an area of like, I originally got into programming to write games because I got bored of playing. I wanted
yeah,
to write one. I have never yet fulfilled that dream, other than a couple of like very basic sort of Blitz Basic and Dark Basic demos years ago.
yeah.
So how would I, Rob, if I wanted to write a GameCube game tomorrow, go about even starting it?
Okay, so the first thing you're going to need is a tool chain, and that's just
Okay.
your environment. I say environment. I'm not talking about like an IDE, because you can just use like VS Code or something, or any text editor. But things like a C compiler, for example, an assembler, a set of libraries and whatnot. So the stuff I do for GameCube, I largely write in C, because I've dabbled in various types of machine code, but it's heavy work. C makes things a lot easier. So I have a set of libraries. There's one called libogc. I don't know what the O stands for, but the lib is obviously library and the GC is GameCube. And there's a whole sort of suite of tools that'll support that. There's a few other sort of libraries, but basically those libraries are giving you like hardware level access to things like graphics stuff, so you can build them up in a much more intuitive way. And then you build that. My GameCube, I have a cartridge that has got an SD card adapter, so I can, from the PC, like get the file compiled onto the SD card and then run it on the real hardware. But most of the development lifecycle, I'm actually using an emulator, because it just gives that faster turnaround time. Spoiler alert, very DevOps. When you're sort of iterating and testing and working quite quickly. So the emulator is reasonably accurate, but certainly when I'm submitting things to competition, you always want to be testing on real hardware, because that's effectively what the competition will be run on. But yeah, I have quite a good setup for my GameCube now. So I have the SD card adapter. I have a little hack that allows me to boot games from it. What else have I got on there? I've got the Game Boy player. That was a fun accessory that was available back in the day. It allowed you to play Game Boy cartridges on the GameCube, so you could have it up on the big screen.
Oh, that would have been cool.
You can actually put the real physical cartridges in there. That was an official product. I've got the broadband adapter, which is that shows you the age of it, because no one really calls them broadband. But it's basically just a network card for it, so I can sort of shift code across the wire onto it sometimes as well. HDMI adapters, and so it's as modernized as I can get it. But most of the work is done on a PC. Write the code in C, compile it, run it on the emulator, find the bugs, and lather, rinse, repeat, as it says on the shampoo bottle.
Yeah, I was just wondering then if the term broadband was another Britishism or not. I'm trying to decide if would it have been called broadband in America.
I'm not sure. I mean, I say being an official Nintendo accessory, you've got that whole sort of Nintendo Japan, Nintendo of America thing going on. So and that's what they
Yeah, I
officially
just
marketed it as.
yeah, fair enough. It's definitely an old school term, that one, when you
Yeah, for
suddenly went
sure.
up to a massive 128K. It's madness. No, that's really cool. As I say, it's one of those areas that I would love to one day sit down and just spend time like writing a game, a proper game as well. I've got an idea for a Salesforce based game for like sort of an education purpose I want to build out. But yeah, the actual kind of building a proper game for a proper gaming environment, either a PC or a console, is one of
Yeah.
those like life check boxes at some point to do.
Yeah. Well, you
So
mentioned Matt Lacey earlier, and he's ticked that box now. He did a game for the Atari Falcon, which
oh
is
wow.
would have been about, I don't know, 92, 93. I think that one came out. So
What
the
was the
machine,
first?
not his game. Yeah.
Yeah, what was the first machine you had?
The first machine I had was a rare Japanese machine that ended up with like a European distribution out of Czechoslovakia, and it got rebadged a bit, and eventually appeared in Dixon's, which for the non-UK folks was a like a major high street retailer of electronics
Yeah.
and electrical goods. And they were one of the places to get home computers back in the day. But it was a lot cheaper than the Sinclair Spectrum, which is on my T-shirt today. So I never got one of those. I got the Sword M5, and that's Sword
Mm,
without a W, SORD.
okay.
But that was Christmas 1982, which will give folks an insight to just how old I'm getting now. But yeah, so I got my first computer for Christmas '82. Started exploring it and writing little things in BASIC, which was the programming language was built into many of the home computers of
Mm,
that era. But it was slow, and so by the following year, I was starting to dabble with assembly language, which was as close to writing ones and zeros as you can get and still have it readable. Um, and yeah, I just kind of never stopped really. So from a very young age, I kind of knew that I wanted to be programming. I don't think it was called developing or coding back then. It was just programming.
mm.
And an interesting story. So I used to spend every waking hour just like doing stuff on my computer. I think by the time I got to my second computer, an Amstrad CPC,
Mm.
which again is another largely British
Yes.
machine. But by the time I was on that point, at one summer's afternoon, my mum came into my room and I was on the programming something or other, and she said, "You want to go out and play with the other kids? You'll never make a living messing about with computers." Well, here we are, 2024. I make a reasonable living messing about with computers, so I feel
I
vindicated.
remember having that same conversation with funnily enough, my grandmother. I was sat um I was sat reading a we were away on holiday somewhere, and I was reading a book on C++ because for spoiler alert for those in the room, that's the kind of cool teenager I was. Reading a C++ book, and she was like, "Well, what does it matter if you learn that? Because surely everyone can learn it, and it'll just be automated by the time you get there." And I don't know whether she just had a great deep insight into kind of the rise of Chat GPT or whatever that will be coming. But
Just thinking that.
yeah, so here we are many years later, still doing it. Before we move on as well, then from kind of computers from the 80s and 90s, is you also have a rare piece of memorabilia, don't you? That
I do.
you are like, so this is a real kind of like full circle Salesforce link. So I will let Rob share his rare piece of memorabilia.
Okay, I shall try and explain along for the folks that are audio only for this episode. But way back in the mists of time, when he was putting himself through college, a certain Mr. Mark Benioff of Salesforce fame wrote Atari video games for the old Atari 8-bit machines. I think he wrote somewhere in the ballpark of about 8 of these things and had them published by a major publisher. And as luck would have it, and again for the benefits of the audio folks, I'm showing it to the camera. I have one of his games. Hopefully you can see that on the video feed. Escape from Vulcan's Isle, as published by Epix. And if I flip to the back, you can see on there, hopefully, I'm just aiming this at a very blurry camera. Here we go.
There you go. It's just come in.
Designed by Mark Benioff. So
There we
yeah,
go.
it's a bit of a rarity, and I will admit I paid through the nose to acquire this one, but I have played it. I do have the original hardware. In the box is the floppy disk and the manual and all the marketing inserts and everything that came with the original. There is a slim possibility. I've been speaking to Mr. Benioff's executive assistant that I might be able to get him to sign it at Dreamforce, which would be fantastic. Nice if it happens, but it's not the end of the world if unsurprisingly, Mark Benioff is far too busy at Dreamforce to do that. But
I mean,
it's always good to have a
I'm
dream,
sure.
right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Mark's a listener to the podcast and he'll be watching along at home right now because, again, he's not a busy chap and doesn't have anything else going on. So,
Yeah. I mean,
Mark,
to be fair, I did post it online on the platform formerly known as Twitter, and Mark liked it. So, he
there you go.
knows I've got this thing. So
if Mark is listening, or anyone who's like one of those 1 degrees away from Mark Benioff is listening, please help Rob get this signed at Dreamforce because I think it'd be it's one of those things I would love to see a picture of just to see kind of the full circle of it all. So and for anyone listening who is young enough and wondering what a floppy disk is, it's a very old piece of hardware that used to hold on it. Rob's going to show it to the camera now. In fact, this is how things used to be. How big a floppy disk is that? What size is that? Is it?
That's a 5 1/4 inch.
What's the data storage on that one?
Ooh, I'm not sure on the thing. I'd have to look that one up, to be honest. It varies from machine to machine, but yeah, not a lot.
Yeah, no, the standard ones. Well, the standard ones on the PC were 1.44 meg, weren't they? So.
Oh yeah, no, the Atari 400.
Oh yeah, they'll be way less than that.
It'd be more like 128K, I think. So.
Yeah, so for those who haven't ever used a floppy disk, a 1.44 meg one was considered the standard, and that was. I had my first machine was an Amiga 500. I'm
sorry to hear that.
There you go. It was a nice little gaming machine, because it was for me at the time was just for playing games on until I got a proper PC. We had an Amstrad of some variety, but I can't remember. Amstrad is for more internationalized listeners. So Amstrad is a shortened version of Alan Michael Sugar Trading Limited, and Alan Sugar is Lord Sugar, as he is officially, is the UK version. I'm going to say the UK version of Donald Trump, but in terms of The Apprentice,
he's the context. I hasten to add.
Yeah, he's not. He is not running for political office, although he is in the House of Lords as Lord Sugar. But he was big in electronics in the UK for a long time. And owned Tottenham Hotspur at one point as well, a football club. Yes. So, excuse me. So, moving on from Mark Benioff's games and old machines, and moving more into the Salesforce world, you're also one of these people that has had a variety of different positions. So, I always love talking to people that have been on what I'm going to call each side of the Salesforce triangle.
Yeah.
Let's make it a square. Why not for little shapes? Yeah. And on the square, there are 4 sides of how you can be involved with Salesforce. You can be involved as a consultant, and that is one very different way of living with Salesforce.
Yeah.
You can be involved as an ISV partner or a partner, and that's another different way where you're producing an app that's resellable. You can be involved as a customer or end user, and that's when you suddenly get all of the love. And then you can be involved as someone in Salesforce, which is what we've seen a number of our friends and colleagues move into doing. We had Alba on the podcast a few weeks ago, and we've got other people lined up who will be on that front and who have been from that front. So you're quite unique, Rob, in that you have been on 3 sides of that square. You've not yet worked for Salesforce, but you've been a consultant, an SI partner, and as a contractor. You've been an end user of Salesforce as well, as you attested to earlier, and obviously you also now work for an ISV with Gearset. So tell me what it's like with the different roles. What's the pros? What's the cons? I mean, obviously, your favorite role is working at Gearset, but yeah,
Yep.
how do you find? Yeah, have you found that transition between roles, and do you think there's a great variation or not?
Yeah, I mean, they are, as you say, kind of very different beasts. And historically, I've kind of adapted based on my kind of life needs a little bit as well. So as we kind of mentioned earlier, my first Salesforce role, when I first kind of came into Salesforce, technically I was still a contractor, but I
Hmm.
was a IT generalist. I wasn't specifically looking at Salesforce. I was doing .NET and Access and various other systems. Um, and I think after a very short while, they said, "Well, would you like to become a permanent employee here?" And I said, "Yeah, no, that's fine." Because at the time, I had a very young baby.
Hmm.
She's now like nearly 15, um, and so it suited me to have like solid, stable, predictable work. Which is kind of the advantage of working for an end user, particularly as an employee. You have that. Well, I mean, some might argue that there's no such thing as 100% job security, but in a comparative scale versus
Yeah.
contracting and consulting, it feels more stable. You're PAYE, you don't have to, do all the complicated tax things. You just have a bit of an easier life of things. But the other advantage of that from the technical Salesforce side is that you have, for the most part, one org to worry about, and you can go really deep on that and know it, and understand all the intricacies of how things fit together, how the business is using it, things that you should be doing it if you were a consultant, but you never really have time on the length of that engagement to get to
No.
the same level of depth. So I think because that was my first Salesforce role, I really kind of honed my skills a bit. Or effectively, started those skills from scratch in Salesforce, and kind of learned that org really well. And I thought I was pretty good at that. And that's at the point where I got comfortable. I thought, as a stretch goal, let me see if I can go and be a consultant, and work on multiple orgs, get variety. Um, you know, I'm pretty good at this Salesforce thing now. No, no. Knowing one org doesn't mean you know all orgs, and also
Hmm.
because you know in a lot of cases, I was like a one person at its peak, maybe a 3-person team of Salesforce people. You haven't really got people that do work on those big orgs and been in a lot of projects to teach you best practice. So you bring a lot of bad habits across with you. So when I went to work for a consulting partner called here in the UK called BrightGen, they have a different name now that I can never remember, but they're part of a larger organisation now. Um,
Yes.
but effectively, that was my first time working with a proper Salesforce, App Exchange approved, etc. partner. And yeah, most of that time was spent learning to unpick those bad habits. Like, for example, we talked about earlier, don't throw Apex at every problem. It's the hammer to tighten the screw mentality. It's not the right tool for the job. Look at the capabilities that the platform itself has out of the box before you get to Apex, because there's probably something that's actually a lot more efficient. We talked about performance earlier. Sometimes the stuff that Salesforce themselves have fine-tuned behind the scenes that we never get to see are the most performant solutions for that reason. And so it was some of that was breaking bad habits. I learned a lot from very, very smart people. Some again in the wider Salesforce community, particularly in the UK, but I think he's international now. Will know Bob Buzzard, aka Keir Bowden. He's a very big voice in the Salesforce community, MVP
Everyone
Hall of
knows Kier.
Fame, and yeah, one of the best architects out there. I worked alongside him at BrightGen and learned a lot there. So I think the key point is in each of these roles that you transition through, you're always going to be learning something new,
Yeah,
and that's
that's.
kind of a strong driver for me. I went back to another end user after that, in a completely different role. I ended up being a product manager of all things. So I was somewhat removed from the tech. I was working for Western Union, and I learned that
Mhm.
side of it. It was product management with a liberal sprinkling of business analyst as well. The roles converged a little. And again, I kind of learnt that additional way of thinking. And some of the consultancy stuff, when you're on a client project engagement, kind of lent itself to that. So I wasn't coming in completely cold, but again, to grow that skill set and kind of really understand, how do you run a project, not just deliver the code or the config, just kind of get more rounded out. And then from there, as you alluded to, I then set up my own company and did like contract consulting, because by that point I had a more rounded out skill set. I was able to go and speak to clients, size up a project, do the analysis, work out what was needed, estimate things, and then work on the delivery. So it's always been a sort of step up journey, just moving up and up to that.
That's
Which
good.
brings us to where I am now at Gearset.
Yes. So BrightGen are now Credera. I just had to Google that in the background because
I knew it began with C, but I couldn't quite remember the name. Apologies, Credera.
No, it's funny because I was Rob and I saw each other 2 weeks ago. In fact, at London's Calling, where Keir Bowden, aka Bob Buzzard, who I'm pretty sure everyone in the ecosystem must know of at least, he was there and was catching up with him, and I had to look at his badge to remember what Credera were called, because it's just ingrained in your head, isn't it? Like the name BrightGen after a decade or so.
Yeah. Name changes are always like that. Yes,
we're hoping to get Keir on the podcast soon as well, so he'll be a very interesting episode, I'm sure, because I think he predates. I think it's I think Mark Benioff sort of had Keir was the first person to commit code. I'm pretty sure as an external partner on the platform. It feels like sometimes he's probably not that, but he feels like Keir's been around and predates most of us. But so that's, and what you're saying there about the different skill sets and learning them and building yourself up into a more rounded individual is really interesting, because I do think that there are a lot more overlaps than people realize in doing the different roles. I think there's some definitive specifics. So for example, with I think when you're at an end user, having that one org to focus on means and typically when you're at an end user, there are less timeline pressures. It's less, when you're at a consulting organization, you have someone running the organization like me, who's then sat there going like, have you done your timesheets? This is only, we've only got 8 hours that they've paid for, yada, yada, yada. And there's very much a more commercial side of it. And you can be as nice as you want around that, but at the end of the day, you've still got to pay for things. At an end user, when you're in-house, I think there's a lot more freedom to embrace looking at things and just trying to, my wife's recently joined an end user. One of the things she said she quite liked is she's gone from a consultancy to an end user, is saying I've got one org, which she is able to really dig into and understand to a deep level. But as you mentioned, but also that thing of someone the other day just had a problem. And as you said, as a consultant, it's like, well, that's not in scope. And you could want to help them as much as you want, but if it takes 2 days or 3 days worth of your time to look into, you've not got the spare 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
Whereas for this, she was like, well, actually, I've not got that workshop until then, so I've got a couple of days, and was able to go in and fix it and sort it, which is always a nice feeling to be able to be helpful. And I think on an ISV side of things as well, I think on an ISV side, it's very interesting and different, because you almost feel more removed from. I found when I worked at ISVs before that I felt a step removed from customers.
Yeah.
And that may have just been the role I was in, but you kind of, with a consultant, you're sat there in the room with the person who might be using the system, or at least the person who's paying for it. Whereas, as an ISV, especially as a developer or a consultant, or someone building out the product in an ISV, you're often very unlikely to if you're building one of the apps, like, I don't know, say you're working at one of the big ISV partners, you're very unlikely to sit down face to face of a day or even every week as a developer and get to speak to an actual end user. So there is that kind of separation as well that I think can be interesting.
Yeah, and as you touched upon, it does largely depend on the role. For my own role,
Yeah.
I'm actually quite far removed from engineering, but I'm very, very involved with the community. So again, for the benefits of the folks here, my role at Gearset is what's called a DevOps advocate. So if you've ever sort of encountered Salesforce's team of developer evangelists or admin evangelists, it's a very similar kind of idea, but obviously more focused on DevOps. And the idea is that I engage with the community. So it's a little bit about education around DevOps. It's a little bit around getting feedback, not just necessarily about Gearset the product specifically, but about things that pain points that people have with managing their changes in Salesforce. So I write a lot of blog posts. I have a video series. I come and chat to other podcasts like this one, for example. And I turn up at Salesforce community events and submit talks, and so it's very much an outreach people. So I've kind of still maintained that connection with not just users of our product, but the Salesforce community at large. And best job in the world. It's being out there amongst the people that I can relate to, that that share that passion for all things Salesforce. It's a good place to be, and it's a role shift for me again. I mean, technically it comes under marketing. When I was a developer supporting marketing departments, I was never a big fan of marketing turning up at the last minute with an impossible requirement. But I'm on the other side of the fence now. I can sometimes see where some of that comes from. But yeah, it's a career shift and a career change again for me. Learning another facet of our little world.
Yeah, we had I mentioned a minute ago, we had Alba on a couple of weeks back, who is a developer advocate, a senior developer advocate, I think, to get her title right, for Salesforce. So yeah, it's a parallel sort of role to that, more focused on the as you say, DevOps and what Gearset does. So and to just kind of cover that off briefly, Gearset, and you can correct me after this, but Gearset is a DevOps tool for Salesforce that helps admins and developers and architects kind of move changes through a system. And when I say a system, multiple sandboxes, repositories, things like that, and get your DevOps process running properly. Would that be a fair overview, do you think?
It's a good start. Yeah, I'm not going to go all marketing on this because that's not what I'm here for. But yeah, we basically are in the Salesforce DevOps space. We allow you to deploy and manage your changes in line with DevOps principles across all platforms. So source control, automation, release early, release often, all that kind of great stuff. We also do backup, data seeding, data and metadata backup, archiving, all that kind of stuff around managing what's in your org for data and metadata. So yeah, there's a few sort of strings to that bow, as they say. But yeah, largely it's complete DevOps focus.
Yeah, no. I mean, I've been a Gearset user for many years now, and I think, in fact, and you can check internally at Gearset, but I think the first ever public demo of Gearset was to my former developer group in Leeds. Kevin and one of his team came up to Leeds and very kindly showed us Gearset, got a lot of feedback from us, and then bought everyone a few drinks for the evening, which was very kind of them. So yeah, it was. In fact, I think I was talking to Peter Chittum about that the other week. Again at London Schooling, but yeah, it is a very, very good tool. So that is not a paid plug or anything like that. I genuinely am a user, have been for a while, and do recommend it as a tool. So it is a very good tool. So you should have a look at it. So you mentioned then you're now in sort of a marketing role. So what's your kind of, I'm going to say, day, standard day? And I know that there is no such thing as a standard day, but
no, absolutely.
What's a broad brush standard day or week for Rob?
Well, let's come up with a real world example. So yesterday, for example, yesterday I recorded a demo of how to get started with Salesforce and source control using Git as a tutorial, and that's going to form the next episode of my DevOps Quick Bites YouTube series, which I'm probably going to release today or tomorrow. So yeah, recording video content. Once that was done, I wrote the first draft of a blog post we've got coming up on event monitoring with Salesforce Shield. So a lot of written content is kind of the majority of my work. But then, you know, as I mentioned, I do speak at events. There's this big one in San Francisco coming up in September called Dreamforce. Folks may have heard
Never
of.
heard of it. Nope.
So yeah, I've got a couple of talks in Dreamforce. So I need to start sort of working on building out those talks and the content for them. You know, I'm writing one of the talks I've done before, but I'm extending for Dreamforce. I'm writing some code to demonstrate some stuff. So, you know, despite being in marketing, I haven't quite hung up my my keyboard for code yet. So, yeah, spoiler alert: there's going to be some AI in there because that's the thing now.
Everything has to have AI. Yes,
Everything has to have AI. Yeah. So yeah, so you know, preparing for those talks. A lot of engagement with our product team. So you know, it's kind of a two-way street from the the advocate perspective. So on the one hand, we want to get feedback from the community of what their pain points are or the features that they really wish that they could have, and feeding that back to product and letting them kind of work through how if and when and how we deliver that capability. But also, taking the stuff that product have come up with and communicating that out. Say, did you know that we can do this now? So I've got this week, 3 separate strands of 3 very different topics with our product team, just to sort of share mutual insights and just collaboration is king, right? This is the message we give for all things DevOps. DevOps is like 80% the culture and the people and the collaboration, and only about 20% the technology. We live and breathe that, right? So we're always, cross-team collaborating and coming up with ideas and drawing on each other's expertise. So, yeah, that's pretty much my week this week. It's content is king, and collaboration is not far behind.
So one of the things that I try and sort of get a feeling of by having different people on the podcast from different backgrounds and areas is, I think I think you and I, having started in Salesforce so long ago, we're very lucky that kind of all these options are just always out there. Like once you've applying for a DevOps role, an advocate role, or launching a startup, all these different things. There's all these different options that are out there because you've been around for so long. You kind of have moved up with the ecosystem as the ecosystem's grown, and I think that excuse me, there's a bunch of jobs and things that kind of we as an ecosystem, as we've gone through things, have helped define, is what I'm trying to get at. And so there's a lot of opportunities out there for them. I think for people that are newer and starting out in Salesforce who might be listening, one of the things I'm always keen to ask and kind of get is, what do you think, which kind of person do you think would makes a good DevOps advocate, and who would be the sort of person that the role might fit, so that those who are sat there listening now, who might go, okay, I'm thinking about my career path, it's not just a linear, you're a junior developer, you're a developer, you're a senior developer, you're a team, like it would be if you're in kind of a more perhaps Java-esque space or something like that. You've got all these opportunities open to you. So what sort of person might be interested in kind of an advocate role?
No, that is a good question, and I think the best way to do it is kind of illustrate with a story a little bit. So way back many years ago, after I kind of knew that this type of role existed, eventually a developer evangelist role at Salesforce themselves came up, and quite naturally I applied for it, and I got through to an interview stage, but ultimately didn't get the role. Now, I knew the hiring manager from way back, and I asked for feedback, like, what are the areas that weren't so strong that I can go back to and work on and, and come back fighting another day? And I think I kind of focused too much on the developer and not enough on the evangelist. And by that, I mean, I kind of relied on my technical background too much. And actually, the majority of the role is communication. Now, whether that's written content, whether that's presenting, whether that, all the different forms of communication that we have. I just didn't have that kind of track record in as much. But knowing that allowed me to go and focus on it. So, I presented at a lot of the London admin and developer groups, and I had some help with that from the Speaker Academy that the dev group used to run. I did a lot of writing of blog content. So as luck would have it, some Salesforce content they have written externally through an agency, and I was able to get on that agency's books. So sometimes, you'll see Salesforce blog content on non-Salesforce websites in the wider IT community that are published by Salesforce, but actually written by folks like myself. And that helped me sort of craft my written content skills a little bit more. So I think, to come back to the sort of the headline question there, I think it would really suit people that are strong in communicating. There are two of us DevOps advocates at Gearset, myself and Jack McCurdy. Jack doesn't have a developer background. He's not a out and out techie like me, but he is a very, very strong communicator. And that's why he excels in his role as an advocate. So I think if people want to get into this type of evangelist, advocate, different companies call it different things. They come under this umbrella term called developer relations. And if you want to break into that industry, start a blog if you're not doing one already. Do some videos, present at user groups. Just really refine that delivery skill of being able to sort of stand up in front of people in person or on a video. To write something that explains a complex topic effectively, concisely, with a good turn of phrase. Those are going to be the skills that actually will bring you greater success than just, I know the Salesforce platform inside out, I'm a super techie, I know how to build these complex solutions. That's great if you want to be a developer. If you want to be an advocate, it's all about working with the people.
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting way of looking at it, because I think one of the things I've noticed with all of the kind of advocates and evangelists I've spoken with and worked with over the years, the really good ones are always able to communicate the why. It's all well and good it being like, look, you can build this amazing thing or do this process, but the question really that comes back to it in the center of it is, well, why do I care? So that's a really really interesting breakdown. Thank you, Rob. So, and one of the things that kind of naturally leads on from that is knowing you through the community and knowing what you're like. You are someone who likes to share their knowledge and do those things, which recently you released a book. For those watching, we have the book here, Salesforce DevOps for Architects by Rob and Lars. So first of all, the channel has done a review of the book. I will link to that at the end of the episode and put a link in here as well. Tell me, what made you write the book? I mean, it's a great book. You cover off a lot of stuff, like you mentioned earlier on about how DevOps is actually more like 80% culture, 20% tech. And one of the things I loved about the book was the way you covered a lot of that in detail: the governance, the setup, the processes, the culture, more than just the processes. So how did you get started writing the book? What was there a genesis of an idea that you reached out to the publisher, or did you get reached out to? Tell us the story around that.
Sure. Yeah. So as you know, and we've talked about the fact that I've been in the ecosystem quite a while. Built up a reasonable reputation there. A lot of people, are connected to me now, and obviously that's my day job now. It's connecting with people and being involved with the community. So I have kind of a reasonable standing as a sales. I'm loath to say Salesforce expert, a Salesforce practitioner that's seen a lot of things, and is willing to share that knowledge. And obviously, I now work in the DevOps space. And so, the publisher did reach out to me and said, look, we're wanting to do this Salesforce DevOps book, and we need somebody that is like well engaged with the community as well as knowing the topic. And you just seem like the right fit. And I thought, well, there's this kind of old saying that everybody's got a book inside of them, and it seemed like this was my moment. But also, I felt like was an achievable task, because
Mhm.
I'd written blog posts or videos or whatever on each of the topics that would end up becoming the chapters of the book, and it gave me an opportunity to just expand out and sort of almost brain dump a little bit on my thoughts, feelings, and opinions. Obviously, in the context of a book, you have to kind of unopinion those a little bit and just kind of make it more factual and practical.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of how that came about. I'm not going to say that it was a complete breeze to write a book. The biggest challenges with writing a book, I mean, you've written more books than I have at this point. But the biggest challenge is just carving out the time to work on it and to keep that momentum going. Real life has a habit of getting in the way sometimes, and you have to really be quite diligent and strict with yourself to say, no, I'm going to spend an hour, 2 hours, whatever it is, this evening working on that book. And when I say this evening, it's because I also have a day job to hold down and a family to cook dinner for and what have you. So it's fitting it around your life a little bit. But we got there. Partway through the project, they brought in my co-author Lars just to kind of help with the workload more than anything else. Yeah, we got it across the finishing line, and it was published in February.
As I say, it's a great book, and I really enjoyed reading it. It's one of the interesting things. So first of all, I would definitely count you as a Salesforce expert, Rob, in the space, and as a very knowledgeable Salesforce person. You've got a good reputation for knowing what you're on about for the right reasons. So don't sell yourself short on that front. One of the things where I've been doing the book reviews and things like that is that I have to make myself do is try and forget what I know. And I know that sounds. I'm trying not to sound arrogant or stuck up in any way here, but when you've been doing Salesforce for 15 years, and done other platforms as well, DevOps is not something that I'm like, I have never heard of this concept before. It's brand new. And so one of the things that is really, really hard sometimes, I think for a lot of people reading books and even learning for studying for exams. I was chatting to someone the other day who's studying for one of the Salesforce exams. They're like, "Oh, I'm just bored because like I know this stuff. Where's the stuff I don't know?" And it's like, well, you've got to kind of read through from the ground up to see what you do. But I love the fact that in this book there was a bunch of things that covered off some of the more soft architect pieces is what I'm going to call them for a terrible phrase. So the governance, as I mentioned, the data backup, the piece, data management from kind of like a GDPR perspective and things like that. That I think, and I mentioned this in the book review, is I think that DevOps by nature gets picked up by techies and devs. Because it's a DevOps thing, and at some point you're going to need to build a pipeline to move things through the system, and that very much leans on being a technical thing. And there are, as soon as you try using a source control system as well, let's be frank, Git commands are not the most user-friendly of setups.
No.
And even an experienced Git user, you can find yourself going, wait, where's all my code gone? What's happened there? What have I done here? I need to undo all this nonsense. But I love the fact that the book covered off the stuff that is the non-techie part that's so important. So it's a really good book, and I really enjoy it. Yeah, as I said as well in the review, I really enjoyed the narrative of it. I thought the way you structured the book through was really good, because that to me is the hardest thing about writing a book is, I was the timing and finding time is a tough thing, and it just at the end of the day that requires a certain amount of showing up. And I'm going to put my hands up here and say I'm very lucky that when I wrote both of my books, the first editions, I wrote them at the same time, but it was during COVID, so I had nowhere to go, no one to sit. I was allowed out for a 5-minute walk every day, and that was about it. So, and there's only me and my wife. She's a grown adult. She does not need me to look after her or wait on her hand and foot. So I could easily say I'm going to start writing it. I used to write from sort of 6:30 until 8 every morning, and I used to do something like 7 until 9 every night, and just got in that process. But the hard part is stringing those thoughts together
Yeah.
in a way that when someone is not sat with you, they can read and it makes sense, and they can put it down and pick it back up. And you do that really well. So
I
I
appreciate that.
really recommend the book to people.
Mm.
The other thing I was going to ask is one of the reasons I wrote. So book number one for me, the learning book, was very much just trying to get out there an educational thing to help people learn Apex who can't afford £1,500 to go to a Salesforce course or
Yeah.
everything else. Like it's the book's a fiver, right? In or the equivalent, I think £10 in India. Like it's not an expensive book, as I know from the royalties. The fact that I'm still working.
Yeah, we don't do these
Yeah,
things to get rich, that's for sure.
no, if you want to get rich, do not write a book on Salesforce, is what I will tell you. But the second book, and the reason I started the CloudBites TV YouTube channel, and the reason I do a lot of the stuff I've done, is to try and help me remember things. Because there's so many, and I'd be interested to know if part of the book for you was that as well, where it was just kind of, you mentioned that clarifying of your own thoughts, but clarifying your own thoughts in a way that you've got a reference to go back to.
Yeah, to an extent. A few weeks back, there was something I was trying to do, and I couldn't remember how to do it. And then I realised that I'd written how to do it in my book. So I just grabbed my copy of the book and followed my own instructions, and the thing worked. I
Yeah.
can't remember what it was now. It might have been something to do with the GitHub action or Jenkins or something like that. Because shock horror, I don't just use Gearset. I'm an equal opportunities DevOps advocate. There was something that I was trying to build out, or it might have been a lightning component or something. Whatever the technical thing was. It turns out I'd given the instructions in the book, or had a working example, and just went and used that. So yeah, as we alluded to with my computing history earlier, I am now of a certain age, and I forget things. So it is kind of useful for that. But what I wanted to kind of quickly come back to is what you were saying about the soft architect skills, as you called them, and the thinking about the other factors. That largely comes back, when we were talking about career progression, that comes back from the things that I learned as a consultant and as a product manager. And one of the most powerful questions that I was able to ask, a lot of business analysts will say the most powerful question is why, and it is. But one of the best kind of next best questions is, but have we thought about, it's making sure that you cover off those conditions, or, how are we handling X? All those things, like, you mentioned the compliance, the data protection, the sensitive data, whatever the aspect is that we need to factor in that isn't necessarily a technical challenge, but it's an overall, make this project robust challenge. So, a lot of the content in the book around those type of factors was drawn by but what, have we explained this? Have we thought about that? And making sure that people are able to ask those questions, or at least if they're asked that question, they have something that they can come up with along those lines as well. And again, it's just drawing from my various different types of role as my career's progressed.
It's really interesting you say that as well, about asking that question about how do we deal with this, because I think one of the people I used to work with in a role was the chief compliance officer for a bank, and that is the person, for those that aren't familiar with how a lot of banks work, if there's a problem and they're non-compliant, they can end up in jail, and that's not a fictional they could end up in jail. That's a real they could end up in jail, and and their neck is very much on the line. And I think one of the things that this person said to me once was, everyone in an organization should have that same feeling. And I think it's a very interesting idea for kind of like when you're developing things and stuff like that, is that when you're looking at how are we handling data, how are we looking at data, how are we managing the data, to think that what if this was me going through it? Would I want this done with my information?
Yeah.
And B, kind of, if I was the one that was on the line for compliance here, would I be happy with this solution or not? And I think asking those two questions can give you some real insight into how others are going to think, and will help you be better about making those decisions. Because I see so many organizations still where there's 20,000 duplicate leads and kind of a mess and mishmash of data and all sorts of things that are ancient and old, and you work with the clients to help them reduce it, but there's always that kind of hesitance of, well, that data is useful. It's like, well, it might be useful, but what are you using it, number one? And if you're not, why are you then keeping it? And would you be happy if this was your record, and would you be happy to stand up in court and defend it?
That's a good perspective. It's almost like empathy-driven development at this point. It's like putting yourself in the shoes of the consumer or the end user, or whatever sort of persona that is, and thinking, along the lines of, what would I like to see? What would I not like to see?
Yes, it's a shame that there are more people in big tech perhaps not thinking like that.
Yes, that's a whole other couple of hours of podcast, I think, that one. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So let's move on to something that is a nicer thing, and is not just railing on big tech, which is I mentioned your involvement in giving back to the community, and sharing and trying to make the community a better place as well. And we had Todd Halfpenny on a number of weeks back, where we discussed a myriad of things, but one of them is Shirtforce we discussed, and you are member number 2 of the Shirtforce sort of super team that we have had on. We need to get Will on at some point as well. Therefore, just to complete, I think it's like collecting sort of Pokemon cards. We have to have all the Shirtforce team on. So for those that haven't listened to Todd's episode, go and listen to Todd's episode. But Rob, can you just give us a quick overview of what Shirtforce is? I haven't got a Shirtforce t-shirt on today. It is in the wash, unfortunately, as I wore it stupidly 2 days earlier. But B, what Shirtforce is, and B, kind of how you got involved, and what you do with Shirtforce.
Absolutely, yeah. So Shirtforce, shirtforce.org for those of you online. We make t-shirts. So the t-shirts have mostly Salesforce, but sometimes general IT related jokes, puns, memes, etc. on there. And 100% of our profits go to charity. Now, that charity, we poll the community and say, like, who would you like us to support? The first 3 that we receive then go into a poll, and we do a voting thing. Historically, we've used Twitter for that, but we may need to find a new platform for that as people start leaving that platform for various reasons. But ultimately, the short version is that we let the community decide who we should support each quarter. We change it quarterly, and as I said, 100% of those profits go to that charity. So we're growing, both in terms of the number of designs that we have, and the sales that we manage to make for those various charities. It's basically
Very
just
nice.
3 middle-aged men making dad jokes on t-shirts. But if that's your thing, feel free.
They are great. I actually have on my to-do list very shortly is to. So when Todd was, I can't remember if we mentioned it in the episode or not, so I'm gonna have to go back and listen. But the the cheat facts with the HTTP codes on there.
Yeah.
Todd and I had a good chat about that. So that's one of the ones I need to add to my selection and collection. They're very, very. I mean, for those who haven't got a t-shirt, I would recommend going and getting one, just because A, it's for a good cause, most importantly, but B, they are very comfy, very good quality, and I don't think I've had a t-shirt before that's had so much interaction. When I say interaction, like you wear it, and there's always a thing where people then stop and look at it and go. I mean, my favorite one I've got at the moment is the Jason and the Argonauts one.
Oh yeah,
yeah, and it's one of those things that, like, it's always good when you wear it out somewhere, and then you kind of get a niche group of like computer programmers and sort of Greek history nerds that then sit there and go,
that's quite the Venn diagram there, Paul. Yeah.
It is. I mean, yeah. It is, but yeah, you do get some interesting one. I've got the CFAX one on my to do list, to purchase list. I also like the duck one, which I know yes, there's lots and lots of t-shirts you can buy, and it all goes to a good cause. So I would really recommend doing so. And you've got some cups and
Yep.
jumpers as well, all sorts of apparel for yourselves. Do you have a favorite one on the t-shirts?
I quite like the Apex Predator one with the dinosaur. You know,
That is a good one.
yeah, I'm very I'm very narcissistic in a little way that my favorite ones are all ones that I've done myself. But yeah, there's that one, and then there's the Salesforce Fridays one, which is kind of like the why admins drink thing. It's in the style of like a 50s diner poster with like fake distressed print and stuff. And if you look carefully, the address of the diner on that T-shirt is the address of Salesforce Tower.
Oh, I'm trying to find it now. There's a lot of ones here to find,
I
but I'll
think
have a
yeah, I
look.
think if you just search "why admins drink," it should turn up.
Oh yeah, Salesforce Fridays, why admin drink. Mark's
Yeah.
Diner. Oh yeah. There you go. I love the little
Little Easter eggs and attention in there. But no, because I'm part of that team, I have so many T-shirts, plus T-shirts from events and old computer T-shirts like this one I'm wearing today. I'm
Yeah.
actually banned from buying any more T-shirts until I get rid of some of the old ones now. My wife has decided that she's had enough. The drawers are too full and don't close properly. So yeah, I'm on a T-shirt ban at the moment.
Oh, it's I mean, at least they're for like, it's one of those things you can all she knows they're for a good cause. So I'm sure there's worse
Yeah,
there are worse things to
yeah.
be purchasing
My
and having
daughter
as a
steals
habit.
many of them now.
That's cool.
So yeah,
Yeah, that's a nice little
we,
hand down to next
yeah,
gen.
we mentioned London's Calling a moment ago. That was like a couple of weeks back. Yeah, that London's Calling T-shirt went instantly to my daughter. It hasn't so much as touched my skin.
Yeah, I mean, they're very cool t-shirts, the London
Yeah,
Schooling ones. They always a very good design on there. Whoever they've got doing them definitely does their work properly. So we've covered a lot today, and I'm sort of to bring things to a close. I've really enjoyed hearing from you, like the variety of things that you've done historically and are still playing with, and we use that that term play in what you were saying about playing with um, the old computers and playing. And one of the things that I sort of have hit on a few times with other guests we've had on is about that playing to learn mentality. I think that's a
yeah,
huge thing in a lot of people, is that you won't just learn by, I mean, please go out and buy mine and Rob's books and you will learn a lot from them, but I would say that a far more effective way to learn is often to play around with something. Take it apart, put it back together again. That's how you kind of will learn about why things break, is by breaking them. So what's next for Rob then? What has Rob got on his radar that's coming down the line? And what are we expecting to see from Rob soon? So you mentioned you're working on your DevOps Quick Bites.
yep, yep.
YouTube video. So what else is Rob working on, and where are you off speaking next, I suppose, as well?
So the next one is as I mentioned earlier, is Dreamforce. A couple of talks that I need to polish for that one. In terms of community events, we've now rolled over into August today. So at some point this month, I should hear whether I've had a talk accepted for Florida Dreaming. And then the next one after that, I think, is French Touch Dreaming in Paris. So those are the next kind of speaking engagement things. But yeah, there's always something going on. The video series will continue. There's some blog posts coming up from me. Some interesting projects and partnerships with our product team. So even while we've been on this call, it's saying I've got one saying it's worth following up with Rob on this topic. He's got some thoughts. It's like, yeah, I've always got thoughts. Whether anyone wants to listen to them remains to be seen. But yeah, so there's a few sort of company-wide initiatives and things that we're exploring that obviously I can't give specifics on, but
Cool.
I'm certainly involved in and giving some input on those, which is fun. It's always validating to have your opinions at least listened to. But opinions are exactly that. You can choose to follow them or not. And I would not have it any other way. Outside of that, so as of last month, I became vice president of my local Rotary club. So I'm doing a lot of work around that. More giving back to communities, not necessarily the Salesforce one this time around, but at a local and international level. I manage the international outreach portfolio for the club. So
Can you explain what the
I'm a
Rotary are
serial
to
volunteer.
just for listeners that might not be familiar? Can you explain what the Rotary Club? I know they're a very international organisation,
Yeah,
but
of course.
just
Yeah. So the Rotary Club is a service club, and what that means, we exist to to do good things for other people that don't necessarily have the advantages that we do. There's also an element of fellowship, so we'll meet for lunch, or like as where are we at now, Monday evening, we went out, and just got together, and just chatted and socialized, so there's that social aspect as well. But yeah, it's international. It strongly supports good causes. You know, at the global scale, they've been very instrumental in the global eradication of polio, for example. We're
wow.
at sort of 90 something percent eradicated. There's like 2 countries left that we need to just finish. So yeah, it's just one of those, volunteering for a good cause, and hanging out with like-minded folks as that as well.
I
So
think that's a fantastic note to end that on. And just again, thank you, Rob, for coming on and speaking and sharing all these wonderful things. And I think that's a fantastic item to end on, because it really encapsulates you as a person, and why I wanted to get you on here, because you are one of the people that gives out so much to the community. So thank you for that. So I do ask all guests, do they have a tip that they could share with the listener or the viewer, to help them in their career? It could be a tip on Salesforce, it could be a career tip, could be just something you should get out and do. We've had a real variety of them. Todd was very big on going out and joining a group and saying yes to things. We've had Alba, who was again kind of big on getting involved with the community, but just trying to kind of push yourself to speak. We've had Christine gave some really good insights into don't go sharing all your code on ChatGPT, which I know is a very obvious one, it seems, but it was a really kind of good conversation we had there around kind of AI and safety. So have you got a tip or two that you would love to share with the community to help them?
So tempting as it would be to come up with a nice, easy technical tip, I'm actually going to go sort of more broad and conceptual on this one. So, folks that have met me, or folks that are watching me on this video, will see that I am a white middle class male, and that affords me huge innate advantage just by those facts. So one thing that I would encourage folks to do is that those of us that have innate privilege for whatever reason, whatever sort of socio-economic circumstances that we have, spend it on those that don't. Support people that just need that leg up, whether it's trying to break into a new role, Salesforce or otherwise, whether it's getting their voice heard at the table, whether it's a community initiative that supports people in a very practical day-to-day life way. If you have advantage just by the circumstances of who you are, whether that's gender, race, religion, whatever kind of factor that comes into that, don't keep it to yourself. Spend it wisely. Use that advantage to the benefit of others.
That is a fantastic. Sorry, I'm just making a note of that to include that in kind of our show notes, and our description, because I think that's such an important thing and a great tip to give out. So once again, thank you so much, Rob, for everything you do in the community, but also for coming onto the podcast today and sharing that wisdom with us and your story. It's been fascinating, and I'm now going to try and avoid going on eBay and buying a bunch of old computer hardware to play around with.
I'm a promulgator of those bad habits, obviously, but no, I've enjoyed it, Paul. It's good to chat with you as always, and I look forward to seeing you out and about in the community real soon.
Yes, I'm sure. Well, I'm hoping as well to be at French Touch Dreaming, so I'm sure we'll get to catch up there, if not before. Thank you so much to everyone for listening and watching. I hope you've enjoyed this episode and learned as much as I have. Please remember to subscribe if you're listening to this on your podcast player. Please leave a review as well, so it helps promote the podcast. Share it with your friends. If you're watching along, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date. And thank you so much for listening. And I look forward to catching you on the next episode. And once again, thank you to Rob.